Some of the lessons learned from this, and I thought this was interesting because Raytheon was at the time a more sophisticated user of tools than some of our other customers, but they felt that the tool support for a product line operation was inadequate in the sense that they had architecture documented partly in the Rational Rows tool, partly in Word documents, partly in PowerPoint slides. You had generalized requirements in the Slate tool. You had feature descriptions and definitions in the domain specification and domain definition document. So things are spread across a number of different documents and models, and no real tool support for integrating all of these. So keeping track of changes and keeping track of discrepancies that arose in the documentation turned out to be a problem.
Did they have any feedback on their configuration management as a result of all of this?
No, configuration management didn't seem to be an issue for them. They never reported any significant problems in that arena.
Interesting.
Yeah. They also felt that domain analysis documentation is really important, and that the documentation that they produced, while very useful, still fell short in things like coming up with a rationale for the presence or absence of particular features in core assets and products. Why does this exist, and why did you do it this way and not some other way? Because they felt that would have helped future reusers understand where CCT was coming from and make it easier to integrate the CCT assets once you understood the big picture. They certainly appreciated the benefits of having an architecture to avoid the architecture mismatch problem. Product builders do need more support than a list of components and a list of variation mechanisms. They really need a product builder's guide or a production plan that shows how to go from generalized generic assets to specific implementations on specific platforms for real products. It certainly pays to be flexible in your approach when you're starting out on a product line, and being capable of learning from the initial experience and changing what you do along the way as necessary. In their case, they had to introduce architecture and introduce an architecture evaluation step. For other organizations that are already doing that, the flexibility comes with learning from going around the ideal model cycle in the first increment, for example, and then strengthening your processes based on the success of a pilot project, and maybe changing the organizational structure and taking care of things like the funding model, because the funding that got you started isn't necessarily the funding that's going to allow you to continue. Cross-unit teams really do work. So in addition to the internal teams within the Raytheon organization, they had people from the government office, they had CETA contractors, they had the SEI, they had the Aerospace Corporation, they had representatives from Spacecraft C2, and they had some people from other potential projects within the NRO. So lots of stakeholders with an interest in the outcome of the CCT product line. And finally, although this started off as an attempt to prove that reuse could actually work within the NRO, having a real target product in mind at the end brought some real-world focus to this, that it's not just let's create a set of core assets and let's create an architecture and components. There is a customer waiting for these and depending on these, and that brought some real business focus to it and mitigated the typical beauty but not profit risk of a two-part organization.
Build it and they will come, hopefully.
Build it and they will come. And in fact, when we do our product line probes, we occasionally run into that they haven't really thought of the business justification, or even if the organization is not going to ship stuff externally just yet, but they're trying to create an internal reuse effort that will be the basis for a product line, they still haven't really thought about what happens if we create this. Will people use it? How will you provide incentives for people to use it? And how will you fund it beyond the initial proof of concept? So the build it and they will come approach is unfortunately more common than we would like to see. So if you are starting a product line, you have to think beyond just build it and they will come. You have to think what would provide the incentive for people to come to this set of products. Don.
And one of the things that often plagues single system architectures is the decision to record it as basically because I've decided so, rather than rationale or footprints.
Yes.
Show why that became the better decision than the alternatives.
Yes.
Because once it gets handed over to some other architect, they're going to try and second guess all the decisions.
Yeah.
Because they have a different set of quality attributes that they're trying to work towards.
Exactly.
So working towards knowing your quality attributes up front is going to be important.
Yeah, and that was one of the deficiencies that the Raytheon people recognized in their domain analysis documentation, that there really wasn't a sufficient documenting of rationales and trade-offs on the kinds of features and requirements that ended up in the reusable assets. So where are they now? We don't have as much information as we would like in this particular case study. We do know that this whole CCT product line approach has been replicated across Raytheon and has spawned this CPR, Collaborative Product Reuse effort within Raytheon. The CCT asset base is now at version 8. There's still the original architectural structure. We did point out at the time that Corba was a technology that was on its way out and that was potentially a risk. And now they are trying to move towards a service-oriented approach within CCT and CCT-like efforts. There are users within the NRO that are all classified projects, so we don't have as much information as we would like on what current product builders are doing. But the big finding for us was that for whatever reason, no contractor other than Raytheon has used CCT in a satellite command and control application. So despite the original vision of providing a core asset base to multiple different command and control contractors, only Raytheon has actually used the CCT asset base on these government contracts. And we don't really know why. Whether it's that the government has backed off on its idea of providing an asset base or mandating an asset base, or whether Raytheon is the only organization capable of doing this. I can't believe that that's the case. So we don't really have information on this. The other thing that Raytheon told us was there are no components within the asset base that address what, in their terminology, is the man-machine interface. So it's hard to produce a demo system to impress the generals when you are trying to get money. So it would be nice if they had some easy way to at least get the displays and the blinking lights and the satellite tracks up. So far, at least, there isn't a capability to do that.
Well, it's almost a middleware.
Pardon?
It's almost a middleware product.
Yes, it is. It's like a middleware product, yeah, because you as a product builder, you have to do the front-end interfacing stuff, and you have to supply the orb and all the other back-end kinds of stuff, yeah. So this, again, is a checklist for people who want to be in the product line business. Do you have the necessary domain expertise? Do you have a legacy base? In this organization, the process maturity level was at least, as I recall, level 3. And you actually had 2 champions, one on the government side and one on the contractor side. They also got a strong architectural vision early on in the evolution of the mindset away from it's just a toolkit, it's just a set of components, to no, it's actually an architecture and a set of components to support ground station operations. And as a risk reduction, doing it as an incremental development and refinement approach rather than a big bang approach. And don't forget, they also had a real product as the target for this. So what I said in the earlier module about coming up with a pilot approach to product lines that is more than just a toy example. Having a real product with real consequences is a much more realistic proof of the reusability of the core asset base. Any overall questions or comments on Raytheon? Raoul?
A couple of questions about how the project was assembled and how it was financed and managed. Because it seems like, to me from the case, it seems like most functions to support the product line, like the maintaining the product line or giving training to users, most of those were still being done by Raytheon, right?
Yes, and as a matter of fact, in the interest of full disclosure, Raytheon also got the sustainment contract.
Oh, so there was a follow-up
for the asset base. So there was a follow-up, yes. Okay. Yes. So they got the contract for the original asset base plus the follow-up contract to maintain it.
That would be the reason where they were able to continue
to use the asset.
Yes, I would assume that played a role in it. Certainly, they would be probably best positioned of all people bidding on this to actually use it successfully. But I still find it interesting that no other external organization has used the asset base, at least as of when we last talked to them. But to get back to some of the other points you were raising, the funding, for example, the funding came from the government. So they didn't have to come up with a funding model for reusable assets. The funding was there to do that from the get-go.
Yeah, but originally you said that they were thinking about building this kit that will be reusable. So maybe they haven't thought about maintaining that thing or providing training for people using it afterwards, keeping all those costs of maintaining that product line.
Oh, yes, I see. Yeah, I don't know at what point Raytheon got the sustainment contract. So, yes, because depending on when you find that out, that may influence whether or not you are proactive about anticipating some of the maintenance.
And it looks like they had the rights to spin off a commercial product off of it, so it would be in their interest to also keep the government line going.